Hey, morning guys, Alex from FastFitnessTips here. Today I'm going to talk about periodization and in particular how to plan your training across the whole year. You'll remember last month we put out this time in zone calculator. It wasn't designed to be anything like super special. Basically, you put in the hours per day that you want to train, your days off, the kind of plan that you happen to be following, and it will tell you pretty much kind of back of the envelope calculation, but reasonably accurate, what your time in zone would be if you follow a number of plans which are already graphed out here for you. I mean, this doesn't tell you what you should be doing necessarily. Yes, you can read up on the science and realize that in general a kind of polarized training plan or training intensity distribution makes sense. But it doesn't mean to say it makes sense for every month, for every athlete in every situation. So this week we're going to talk about how to plan your training across months and across years. And that's basically how does your training plan change with time? And that is called periodization. I mean, this term periodization is very misunderstood, but it just basically means how does your training change with time? You know, training isn't entirely flat, is it? It's not just a flat line that carries on forever. Even if you were peaked in terms of your performance today, you wouldn't stay there indefinitely. You know, that's not the way human physiology works. So a degree of variation is needed, and that is all periodization is. It's how do you vary your training plan to best suit you and how to maximize your gains. So I guess the first thing to say on this topic is training periodization means applying a plan to your training. I guess you could get away without applying a plan. It's a bit like here when you're trying to assemble that IKEA flat packed furniture. You kind of need a plan to know what you're doing. Look, you can work off plan and just see what happens, like Stephen Fry here. But, you know, results tend to be haphazard. In other words, it might turn out fine. Yeah, that's true. You don't necessarily need a plan. You don't necessarily need a coach, but why not get all the advantages you can grab? Because let's face it, training's hard enough at the best of times. And if you're doing everything on your own, it just makes it harder than necessary, if you see what I mean. Now, that's not to say you can't read up and work out what best applies to you, look into the science, look into the pros and cons of various techniques, various periodization strategies, various time in zone distribution strategies. Look, you can do all that, but that's also what your coach will do. A good coach will do that, stay up to date and apply it to you in a way that's meaningful so that you don't just have to say, oh, today I'll go hard. Oh, today I'll ride a long ride. Oh, today I'm going to ride hills. You know, this is rather haphazard. You should be saying something like, well, based on my TSS or my chronic training load or my training stress balance, i.e. my form, and the fact that I'm 3 months out from my next event, then I need to use roughly my 6 hours of training to do a polarized model, whilst at the same time subtly increasing my TSS in a way that favors high intensity, low volume training in order to maximize my gains and give me every advantage I can have in order to peak at the next event. But come on guys, who says that? Most of the time we just say, oh, today I'll ride hard. Oh, today I'll ride easy. So all I'm doing today is putting it out to you that being more structured, being more careful with your training is more likely to maximize the gains, yeah? It's as simple as that, really. So in the month that Kipchoge's just broken the marathon record and come under unbelievably 2 hours, in fact, what was it? 1 hour, 59:40 seconds, a completely awesome performance. Let's talk about some of the principles of training that you'll apply to periodization. Well, I guess the first thing is you're going to want to establish a routine because consistency is key, right? Yeah, like being consistent probably is more important than anything else, more important than intensity, more important than volume itself. So whatever you can do to establish a routine, whether it's setting set days when you exercise, clearing your timetable at certain times, getting up at a certain time of day, that's going to be the thing that's going to help you most. And sure, that's what a plan partly imposes upon you. The plan imposes a routine on a relatively unstructured time. Next, you're probably training towards a goal. That's going to really help. If you can set something that's really clear in the future, then it gives you focus. And also it means that your plan can be tailored towards that goal. So it's not going to just be the same training month in, month out. It's going to be something that helps you peak for the event. That's basically the concept of linear periodization, that your volume might go down, but your intensity probably goes up for the event, and you're event ready by the time competition time comes around. Now, sure, there's a complication if you have multiple events, and these days in cycling we tend to have more and more events than just one event like mid-season. But what that means practically is that in terms of the event, if it's distributed throughout the season, then your variation in your cycles, like your periodization variation, or just let's put it simply, how much things change week to week, day to day, month to month, is much more subtle. So the more events you have, then the more subtle the change is, because you're staying as peaked as possible throughout the whole year. And definitely there's a trend these days for the off season to not really be an off season at all, but just a different season like cyclocross season or mountain bike season, where you're racing road in the summer. Or another great alternative is to race indoors, like Zwift training and racing indoors over the winter, so that you get less of a decline. In fact, if you look at pros' habits from winter to summer, you find that they're quite subtle in terms of the volume and intensity change. So for example, we're talking about 10% or less change from off-season to on-season for pros. So you probably don't need to have much more major swings than that either. Okay, before we go into this in really more depth and talk about what helps you in a prescriptive training plan, etc., and how to plan your month and your year, let's just attack some of this jargon, because this area is replete with lots of unhelpful jargon. So essentially, if you break down the year, which would be called a macro cycle, then you're talking about phases that build up to your race season. And you can just call that your competitive race season. Before the race season, you start in the kind of base phase, or the, let's call it conditioning phase, when you build out your base, like your foundation to the house is made in that base phase. That's not to say you don't have high intensity efforts or even threshold efforts in that base phase. We'll come on to that in a minute. The difference between base and then the next phase build and the next phase race is actually quite subtle, much more subtle than you actually think perhaps. So you've got the base phase, then you've got the build phase, which might be subdivided into build 1, 2, or 1, 2, and 3, which takes you into a transition when you'll be peaking for the race. So really, there's no great secret in the sense that your base phase begins with more high volume, low intensity. You transition through a decrease in volume, but an increase in intensity. And then you try and peak your intensity. Probably your volume is low relative to your base, but not super low. You know, you're still maintaining some volume, even coming into a peaking and race phase. So the big picture across the year is just called your macro cycle. Your monthly variation would be called your mesocycle, and your weekly variation is called your microcycle. And sure, there's no need to use this jargon at all. If you find it annoying, there's no need to use it. Just think, how does my training change year to year, month to month, week to week, so that I'm doing the right thing? That's all this jargon's about. So real quick, let's talk about types of periodization, or types of changing your training plan. That's all I want to say that it is here. So the first one is linear periodization. It's illustrated in this chart. And this is the classical type of periodization, where your volume is high at the base phase or over the winter or over the off season. It tends to come down a little bit, and then your intensity tends to come up. And moreover, the differences between, your week to week, your day to day rides are actually pretty much subtle, on a continuum, and not very distinct. That's all really linear periodization is. There are some problems with it, however. In particular, tapering can often be taken over to an excessive degree, like 30, 40, 50% change from winter to summer, let's say. Secondly, it's difficult to maintain a continuum from, let's say, day to day, like without a careful calculator. How do you work out how much exactly you're meant to be doing? Like, can anyone work out like TSS from week to week, month to month without having a calculator do it for you? The third factor is quite a big one. Motivationally, it can be difficult because basically you're doing the same thing, but it's just varying incrementally like day to day. So that can be motivationally very much a challenge because actually the daily training may look very, very similar, but the intensity distribution might be just subtly different. So it's very hard to stick to your plan when you know you're going to be doing like almost the same thing, like 7 days in a row, let's say. So the alternative to this is non-linear periodization or undulating periodization, which is basically that you're cycling what happens, varying. Although your trend is generally up, let's say your trend in intensity is generally up, your intensity volume distribution might be different session to session or week to week. And this keeps the whole thing more stimulating. Now, usually when we're talking about non-linear, we're actually talking about blocks. And all that means is you prescribed a training load and intensity distribution in particular sessions and then in particular weeks. So it's just an exercise prescription that follows you from each day and each week. Nothing particularly clever about it. So most of the training that we do, if we follow a plan, is basically block periodization. It just means training in certain targets that match what you're doing, let's say, this week. Now, what about reversed periodization? Well, all that means is it's opposite to the traditional model where the volume is higher base and then it decreases and your intensity increases towards the race time. In reversed periodization, the volume is actually lower base but builds up to race time, and probably your intensity has to give. Otherwise, if your intensity and volume are both increasing, you might burn out or crash and burn. So reversed is that your volume begins low and builds, and maybe your intensity begins high and decreases somewhat. But therein lies a problem for reverse, because if you think about it, on day one, you're going to start with high intensity, albeit relatively low volume, and that might be a challenge psychologically. Further, remember, if you're coming towards your race period and your intensity is dropping, then you're going to lose some of that high-end ability, like your sprint ability or VO2 max ability is probably compromised with the reversed periodization unless it's done really carefully. Oh, and by the way, you can combine any of these terms. So yes, you could have reversed block periodization, and that would simply be where your volume starts low and increases, your intensity starts high and decreases, but it's done in blocks throughout the months and throughout the year, I guess, as you come to race season. Okay guys, that's enough jargon for now. Let's move away from jargon and look at the science of this area. So I want to ask, what does the science show about whether periodization actually works? Well, there's a number of reviews and meta-analysis. I found 3 meta-analysis. One has kind of just come out. I want to refer you to it here because it came out August 2019, a systematic review of meta-analysis comparing periodized and non-periodized exercise programs. But basically, this one does something quite good. It unearths the problems in this whole area, although they found 21 studies comparing head-to-head periodized and non-periodized programs. Sometimes these studies don't equalize everything else. Like the tenet of science is look at one thing, your hypothesis, and keep everything else the same. So if you were looking at periodized training, you'd want to say the non-periodized approach, the volume or the intensity would be broadly the same, even though the periodization varies. And actually, when you do that, yes, the science does show that in general, periodization is a superior method. You can actually look at the statistics on this, and it's a moderately sized effect, even when they control for volume, that's for sure. In fact, it's in this paper here. Here's a chart showing the difference between periodized and non-periodized training on endurance ability. So yes, overall, it favors periodized training, but it's not a massively overwhelming effect because the studies are generally badly done. There's plenty of reviews showing that, periodized training versus non-periodized, basically badly done. And remember, I'm not talking about training intensity distribution per se. For example, whether polarized works, whether HIIT works, whether threshold works, whether base works. Yeah, we've covered that last month. So I'm talking about something different here, which is periodization, i.e. changing things, and how should you change things in particular. Actually, when you do a deep dive into this subject, you'll find out that most of the studies are actually in gym or in terms of bodybuilding, weight training, that kind of thing. That basically in the gym area, that's where a lot of the studies have been done in terms of periodization. And within this literature, if you want to ask me the specific question, which method of periodization, like linear, non-linear, block versus non-block, forward versus reverse, that it doesn't really show a major effect. Or to put it another way, there's not enough studies done of sufficient quality comparing the two methods to say that this one basically is superior. What I can tell you is from this study did compare linear versus non-linear for weight training, and they found that basically there was no difference. But it might be a case of insufficient evidence as much as no actual difference. In other words, a false negative rather than a true negative. Okay guys, that's enough preamble, but I want to get into the meat and potatoes of this video. In other words, I want to give you a heads up on an awesome calculator we've just created this week, and we've been doing it for several athletes we're coaching, but I wanted to do it in a more systematic way. So this is our periodization planner. So what this will do is help you plan the season, so you don't need to use like random internet information. It will plan your season and help you work out what to do when on a month-by-month basis. So for example, let's say that you're planning to peak in, let's say May, and let's say it's October right now, then it tells you you're in the early recovery phase, you've got 7 months, and you've got quite a long time to train. So let's say I'm an improver defined here by these watts ranges, and that you want to train to be a, let's say, all-rounder, with a power peak that's basically 1 hour. Then look at this chart here, by the way, to work out what type of rider you want to be. And yeah, it's what rider you want to train as, not necessarily where you are right now. So let's say I've got 1.5 hours to train per day, and let's say I'm taking 1 day off a week, then I've got 9 hours per week on average, or a TSS of around 672 across the week, or 112 per day. And here's the brilliant bit. Putting in these variables, you can play around with them, as much as you like. It will tell you this is the best training intensity distribution that you need to do. Not just now for this month, let's say October, but also for November, December, Jan, Feb, March, April, May, when you're going to hit peak form. And the way it does that is it varies your training intensity distribution across the months, so that it will start you off with relatively high base. Yeah, definitely some threshold, but relatively low, high intensity, but not none. You'll build that up as the season progresses. In fact, it will even tell you whether you'll be working at base, pyramidal, polarized, high intensity across each month. And yeah, that varies depending on what you want to do. Also, depending on your training load. So for example, if you're time crunched and you have very little time, and let's say you're, a more advanced cyclist, then it will tend to preferentially give you a lot more high intensity sessions, as you see here. So it will basically give you the training prescription based on your season, based on your availability, and based on your willingness to train to peak at a certain power curve spot. So yeah, whether it's 60 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever, it will give you the relevant training plan. And finally, it does something really clever, is it matches the prescription, which is here, with the actual plan, so you can get granular on this and work out what you should be doing on a daily basis. So it will take your plan and say, okay, this month you should be doing a polarized plan, but which polarized plan? Well, there's a 98% match with our polarized builder plan over 10 weeks, and you can click on it and get it right here. So it will take you right to the Training Peaks download, and we've kept our prices pretty low for you guys, but yeah, I'm going to give you a sweetener and say, because you guys are just such awesome viewers of this channel and you support me all year round, just put in the code CLUB and you'll get 5% off this rate right here. The rates are low compared to most people's plans. These rates are really competitive, guys, but I'm going to give you 5% off there as well. So just preview it, see, click view sample workout, or you can click on view all plans if you think you want to download a different one. That's cool. Find a different one. And for sure, if you want to use this information to write your own plan, go for it, guys. Now, we've done all the hard work for you, but if you want to write your own plan, that's cool. You know, you can use this calculator, FFT.tips TPP, to write your own plan. I'm totally happy with that. Go for it, guys. All right, that's pretty much all I have for you today, but I do want to give another shout out to David Tinker at Intervals ICU, because what he's done is he's now taken our training intensity distribution and summarized them automatically within your week. So when you click on your week summary in Intervals ICU, it will now tell you, this week I did polarized, this week I did pyramidal, this week I did threshold, this week I did base, or this week I did hit. It will tell you what you did this week in terms of TID. So you don't need to guess it anymore. Remember, last week we showed you how to calculate it, but this month we're showing you how to actually get that information automatically. And the way you do it is you sync Strava to Intervals ICU. If you want a quick link, go to fft.tips/ICU and it will take you direct to Intervals ICU. And if you want to do it in a granular way and want to plan your season, for sure, use our new planner. I'll be really happy. All right, guys, I'd be really grateful if you can give me a like or share to this video and mention it to your friends. Give them this calculator directly. It's completely free right now. If it gets busy, then use TPP2 or TPP3 for spin-off versions of the main sheet. All right, guys, happy training. Don't neglect your training over winter. And until the next video, this is Coach Alex signing out. Take care, guys. See you around.